Hello everyone. In this video I want to share my thoughts and opinions about psychological blocks and how many people have them and might not be aware of them. I deliberately created two psychological blocks in my life. I will have to describe those two events so that you can better understand what it is and why knowledge about the workings of the psyche is very important for the whole society. The first incident happened in the 10th grade. Back then I could hardly speak due to stuttering, as well as shyness. I liked a new girl in our class who later asked me herself to be her boyfriend. I agreed, but due to the aforementioned problems, we did not have any relationship at all. In order not to suffer because of my crush on her, I decided to create a psychological block in my mind. What was it? It's simple. I imagined her as a girl of easy virtue, starting to perceive her like that every time I saw her or thought about her. Surprisingly, she actually ended up sleeping with a lot of guys from our school, and some of those guys, including the one who took her virginity, used to say she was a slut. By chance, my unreasonable and erroneous idea about that girl seemed to have become the reality, and it was not so hard for me to think that we were never together. The second incident happened when I was 18 years old. It would be too long to recount all the reasons for my erroneous decision to go to a prostitute in order to lose my virginity. Also, I do not believe that I lost it then, because it was not only without love, but also with a barrier in the form of condom. But that's another story. So, after making that mistake, I realized that I was falling in love with Natasha, a girl who was fired by her boss after she refused to sleep with him, and whose mother was from Turkey and her father lived in the Moscow Oblast. Her attempts to find work were unsuccessful, and when the money she had saved up ran out, she went to her friend to work as a prostitute. When I went to see her for the second time, thinking of helping her, I thought she could live with me until she got a job, and tell her how I felt. My then shyness, together with my fear of stammering, prevented me from conveying to her the real reason for my visit. When I was already leaving, I remembered how I once put the block about the girl from the 10th grade, which I had remembered and regretted quite recently. I decided to seize on the fact that Natasha had the choice to live with her father in the Moscow Oblast, but she chose to become a prostitute, and it was this thought that served as my decision to again consciously make a mistake in the form of a new block that I consciously set for myself at that fateful moment, being unable to simply to tell the truth. Plus, at that time I strongly wanted to leave the country, and I did not need an extra barrier. My infatuation with the girl immediately left me, and every time the thought of Natasha would pop up in my head, I saw her as the girl who made her own choice. And the thought of her soon again went to the bottom of my consciousness. I would like to emphasize that the thought completely covered all of my knowledge and memories that I had about Natasha. That thought, the block that I put, seemed to prevent those other thoughts from rising up to the surface of my consciousness. Natasha was the girl who made her choice in my mind until I was 24 years old. Then an event happened that made me start remembering Natasha, fantasizing about her. The fantasy, little by little, dug out the real knowledge, resting in the depths of my consciousness. And now, my psychological barrier was broken by the facts about her that jumped out. Moreover, the feeling of love that I used to have for Natasha returned to me, and it was as strong as before, as if I had returned to the past, to the moment before I put up the block in my mind. The details of what happened next are relevant within the scope of this video. You can read my free book Simple Truths of Life if you're interested. I will only briefly say that Natasha was no longer in that apartment, and I could not find her. The feeling of love gradually faded away. after I suffered very much for my past wrong decision. And I understand that had I told her then the real purpose of my second visit, I might not get happiness with her, and she might not get happiness with me. Or maybe she would refuse to live with me and would stay in that brothel. Even so, the fundamentals of life are simple, but the huge number of interconnections of its different particles make life rich and complex. And so we get that a psychological block or a psychological barrier is a thought or false knowledge that arises in a person's head every time their reasoning, memories, and or fantasies touch upon the subject of the psychological barrier. I suspect that the fundamental component of such blocks affects many people, but they do not call them psychological blocks because of the object to which such a psychological barrier is directed. Those people perceive a psychological barrier only when the consequences of such a block become too serious to continue to ignore the problem. An example is the knowledge that if you touch a hot stove, you will get burned. Every time you approach the stove, in the back of your mind the thought pops up that you need to take a rag or put on a mitten so as not to get burned. Surely this process is mostly automatic for many people, who probably think more about the cooked food and not about the possibility of getting burned. The same goes for the psychological barrier, and the danger here arises in part because of the automatism of this block. A person simply does not realize that he has a block. People can have many psychological barriers and not realize it. Further, psychological blocks can also be about the laws of physics, for example. People often almost instantly discard new progressive things like the reality of the aura and telepathy, and do not even want to let the idea enter their minds, the thought that these things are possible. Moreover, even when you say that you have proved to yourself the reality of those little known things and other people can also do this on their personal experience, they still do not listen. The words seem to fly past them, and they do not think about what was said. So, I assume that both the knowledge that automatically pops up in our heads and psychological barriers, blocks, that can be created consciously or unconsciously have either one or a similar basis. Therefore, it is useful to know and study this work of our mind, both for our own healthy life and for the healthy life of society. Thank you.